For almost 50 years, you could walk onto a field in central Texas, hand a man $25, and dig up anything you wanted. Bring your own shovel. Keep what you find. And people came. Weekend after weekend for decades, things went out of that field in buckets, in coffee cans, in the back seats of cars. Nobody counted them. Nobody wrote anything down. Nobody knew that a few feet under those shovels was a layer of stone tools that matches nothing else on this planet. Not older versions of something we know. Something was no family at all. The place sits near a small town called Florence, about 50 miles north of Austin. 30 acres of grass and trees along a shallow creek. The water comes from springs, so it never dries up, even in a bad summer. The name comes from Henry Gault, a farmer who bought the land in 1904 and kept turning up strange stone pieces while he plowed. He did what a lot of farmers did. He let people pay to come look. In the 1940s, the land was sold to a family named Lindsay, and the Lindsays turned it into a business. If you've never heard of a pay to dig, it's a simple thing. You own land that's rocky and hard to farm, but full of interesting stuff, so you charge people to come and search. There are gem mines out west that work this way right now. There are fossil quarries you can book a day at this weekend. Nobody was breaking a law. Nobody was doing anything wrong. It just happened that this one field was one of the richest ancient sites in North America, and for half a century it was being emptied out at $25 a head. And here's the part that still bothers me. This wasn't the first time the field got away. In 1929, a man named James Pierce came to dig here. He was the first trained archaeologist the University of Texas ever had. He brought a crew. He worked for 8 weeks, and he was standing right on top of it. His team even pulled up Clovis material, more than 2 years before the famous find in New Mexico that gave that name to the world. And Pierce didn't see what he had. He was looking at the thick layer of burned rock near the surface. It was messy. It was shallow. It didn't look important to him. So he packed up and left. In his own notes, he wrote that the site was being destroyed by digging and that he didn't have the money to excavate it properly. Then he traded some of the pieces away. 22 spear points went out the door in a swap pottery. 90 years later, we know what he walked away from. But there's a strange gift buried inside all that damage. The people who paid to dig were after pretty arrowheads. Those sit close to the surface. Almost nobody bothered to go deeper because deeper meant plain flakes and broken rock that nobody would buy. So the oldest layer, the one that matters most, survived because it was boring to thieves. Then, in 1991, a collector found something he couldn't name. They were flat stones with fine lines cut into them. Careful lines, squares and crossed patterns and rows that repeat. Not tools. Not weapons. Somebody had sat down and made marks on rock on purpose. He showed them to a man named Michael Collins, who was the associate director of the Texas Archaeological Research Laboratory. Collins looked at them, and then he got in his car and drove north. What he found on that land was more than he expected. More carved stones. And a fluted spear point he knew on sight. Clovis, the point style that for almost 100 years marked the accepted beginning of human life in the Americas. He later said he'd never seen so many Clovis pieces in one place in his life. The word he used was flabbergasted. So the good news was that Collins now knew exactly what that field was. The bad news covered everything else. It was private land, it was a running business, and it wasn't his. Knowing what a place is turns out to be the easy half of the problem. He'd spend the next 16 years on the other half. The pay to dig slowed down as the land changed hands. When the new owners found mammoth bones on their own property, Collins got another phone call. In 1998, he talked them into a lease and ran a real excavation for 4 years. It produced more Clovis material. It proved people had used that crete bank again and again for thousands of years. Then the lease ran out. So he filled the hole back in, a dig meters deep, packed carefully back up by a man who knew exactly what was still under it. And then he drove home. I want to stop on that image for a second, because it breaks the usual shape of these stories. There's no bad guy in it. Nobody hid anything. Nobody called him crazy. A piece of paper simply expired the way paper does, and the most important site in Texas went back to being a field. 9 more years went by. In 2007, Michael Collins and his wife Karen bought those 30 acres with their own money. Not university money, not grant money, their money. People who know them say it cost the family a great deal, and then they gave it away. They handed the land to a group called the Archaeological Conservancy, so it could never be sold in pieces, dug up for fun, or built on. Collins started a school to run the research, 16 years from the phone call to the deed. He bought a field so nobody could ever sell it, and then made sure he didn't own it either, which finally let him do the one thing he'd been waiting to do: keep digging. And to understand why he kept going, you need one piece of his past. In the 1980s, Collins had worked on stone tools from a site in southern Chile called Monte Verde. Monte Verde is the place that broke the old rule. Its dates were older than Clovis, and after years of fighting, a panel of 9 archaeologists went down there in 1997 and agreed the dates were real. Collins had held those tools in his hands. He believed them. So when the dig at Gault worked its way down through the Clovis layer and hit what looked like plain empty clay, he didn't stop. That matters more than it sounds. That empty clay is where the whole field of archaeology had been stopping for 50 years. It was the floor below Clovis. There was supposed to be nothing under it, so there was no reason to dig and no money to dig through dirt everyone already knew was empty. He dug anyway. Work at Gault has now covered 15 separate areas, and what changes everything isn't the age. It's how much is down there. 3% of the site has produced 2.6 million objects, not 300, not 3,000, 2.6 million out of 3% of 30 acres. 600,000 of those are Clovis age alone. One of the researchers described the collection in plain words. He said it's an obscene amount of stuff and that people will be working on it for 100 years. More than 2,300 volunteers helped pull it out of the ground. In 2002, the team opened a section called Area 15. The wall of that dig reads like a book, almost 2 meters of burned rock on top. Then softer clay, then a layer of late spear points, then Clovis, and then a thin band where the objects almost stop. A quiet gap of about 10 centimeters, which is the team's way of saying, look, these two groups weren't living here at the same time, and below that gap about 150,000 more pieces, bifaces, blade cores, gravers, scrapers, worked flakes, and around 10 spear points. Right beside them were the bones of animals that don't exist anymore. Extinct horse. Mammoth. In another part of the site, the team uncovered a flat floor of packed gravel, about 2 meters by 3, laid down by human hands. It may be the oldest piece of a building ever found on this continent. Maybe. Nobody's claiming more than that. There were no burials, no skeletons, only 4 human teeth. So the team used a different clock. The method is called optically stimulated luminescence. In plain English, it measures the last time a grain of sand saw sunlight. Buried grains soak up tiny amounts of natural radiation, year after year, and hold it like a charge. Shine a light on them in a lab, and they give it back as a faint glow. Measure the glow, and you know how long that dirt has been in the dark. The answer came back at a mean of 18,500 years, give or take 1,500. The full spread ran from about 16,700 to 21,700. It was published in a journal called Science Advances in July of 2018. But the age isn't the remarkable part. Thomas Williams, who led that paper, said it as plainly as a scientist is allowed to. He said the projectile points are unique. Nothing else like them has been found. Read that again slowly, because it's easy to skim past. This isn't a claim that the tools are older than Clovis. It's a claim that they don't look like Clovis, or like the western stem points out west, or like the tools from Meadowcroft or Florida, or the site a quarter-mile down the same creek, or like anything anyone has dug up anywhere in North or South America, which leaves archaeology in an awkward spot. And you can hear the awkwardness in the name. They call it the Gault assemblage. An assemblage in this work is just a pile of things found together that nobody can sort into a known group. It's the polite, professional way of saying, we have no idea what this is. There are people under that creek bank whose culture doesn't have a name. And there's one more thing down there that almost nobody talks about. The carved stones. More than 100 of them have come out of this land since 1929. Fine lines scratched into soft limestone with the sharp edge of a flake. Crossed grids. Zigzags. Rows of paired lines, one with shapes that look like leaves. 11 of them were pulled out under controlled digging with dates attached, and they're among the oldest art ever found in the Americas. Nobody knows what they say. Maps, maybe. Counts, or just somebody making something because they wanted to. Many are crusted over with hard white minerals, so we can't even see all of the lines. Now the part where the skeptics get their turn, because they've got a real point. The dates scatter more than anyone would like. One sample taken higher in the wall came back older than two samples below it. That is not what clean layers look like, and there's a bigger worry. The soil in that valley is a heavy clay that swells when it's wet and cracks when it's dry. Critics say small pieces can slide down those cracks over thousands of years and end up sitting next to dirt far older than they are. In 2022, a group of researchers scored North American sites for how undisturbed they looked. Gault came out ahead of its neighbor down the creek, but both scored low. There's also a strange silence. About a quarter-mile away sits the Friedkin site, with its own older-than-Clovis tools, dug by a different team. The obvious move is to lay the two collections side by side and compare them directly. As far as I can tell, no one has published that, so this isn't settled. It's a live fight between serious people. And then, right when the world was watching, the team did the last thing you'd expect. They stopped. After recording that 3%, they filled the excavation back in. On purpose. The reasoning was simple. 97% of the site is still down there. The scientists of 40 years from now will have tools nobody in this decade can imagine, and it would be a waste to spend the evidence now. Today, there are no open digs on the property and none planned. If you visit, you look at a grassy floodplain and a creek. There's one last thing. In 2022, Michael Collins was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The man who spent 16 years fighting to save that field can't tell you its story himself anymore, so that's the shape of one field in central Texas. For 50 years, people paid $25 a day to carry it away as fast as they could. A trained archaeologist stood on it in 1929 and walked off. Today, it belongs to a nonprofit. It sits covered over, and the people with every right to open it are choosing not to. The oldest thing anybody found there has no name, no known relatives, and nobody alive who can claim it. It's going to stay in the ground until someone deserves it. I don't really have an ending for this one because it hasn't happened yet. The rest of that field gets open when somebody builds a tool worthy of it. And I'd like to be around when they do. If you want to be there too when that day comes, subscribe, and I'll tell you. Thanks for watching.